Hi, this is Richard Edelman, and you're listening to The Trust Makers.
Hi, I'm Justin Blake, Executive Director of the Edelman Trust Institute, Edelman's global research center for the study and cultivation of trust. Welcome to a special series of the show where we will be recording on the ground from Davos at the 2023 annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. Throughout the week, I will be speaking with attendees who are experts in their fields about this year's forum and gather their insights on our just released 2023 Edelman Trust Barometer. I'm joined today by Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC. Tim took on the BBC's top job in 2020. Since then, he's been focused on moving the UK's national broadcaster into a digital future and earning consumers' trust. Tim, welcome to Trust Makers.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So, Tim, the BBC is one of the world's best known, most respected brands. A lot of our listeners are non-UK. Can you just describe the scope of the BBC for our listeners?
Sure, and we're a bit of a curious beast. So in the average week, nearly 500 million people around the world get to interact with the BBC, either listening or watching our content. We're an organisation that's kind of got different models. In the UK, we're the public service broadcaster, so everyone pays a TV licence. That's currently £159 a year, and every household that's got a television base and broadcasting live television pays that. That generates most of our revenue. But on the side of that, we've got a commercial arm, so that's now up to over $2 billion in revenue, and US audiences will be used to seeing Dancing with the Stars on ABC, which is one of our shows, Strictly Come Dancing, all the way through to the news channel and various things in between. So we've got a big international business. We also finally have a thing called the World Service, which broadcasts in areas like Afghanistan, India, obviously in Ukrainian service, the Russian service performing a critical role now. So the BBC's multi-headed in that regard, lots of different business models around the world.
Terrific. Looking at the license model, what are the advantages of that model, especially as we think about trust in media?
Well, it's a huge privilege. It's not without its complications as you're dealing with. It's the BBC, I should have said, was or is underpinned by a royal charter. So that sets the BBC up for a period. Currently that runs to 27-28. And then within that, we deal with the politicians in terms of setting our funding and the rate of the licence fee. And we've done that twice. We've just done a settlement that takes us to 27-28, to the end of the charter. And that's how it works. Everyone pays their license fee. It's set in that way with the politicians. What that allows, to your question, what it allows you to do is, and this is a privilege for us, is plan. So we have certainty of funding in our core market through to 27-28. Now, we don't get all what we want. We're in the political game on the funding. So every model, and your listeners will know, whether you're in public markets, private equity, every model has pros and cons. But the license fee allows us a bit of long-term planning.
And does it also change how you are able to do coverage in any way? Does the lack of a kind of commercially funded model alter how you report?
Totally. So linked to that long-term degree, that degree of stability, is also the fact that we clearly are a purpose-driven organisation. I don't need to make a profit on all that UK revenue through the licence fee. What I need to do is literally do good and make sure it's valued by every household. We are in some ways accountable in the same way as an enterprise, a commercial enterprise, in that at the end of the day, the licence fee is supported when people use us. But what it allows us to do is all of our activities, whether it's local radio, regional television services, all the things we do, our news coverage, I don't have to make return on investment in a commercial sense on every angle. And that allows us just to go after the truth and go after things with our values. And that is a real privilege in this day and age.
But if part of that is about customers using you, does that also mean that you have to fall back to choosing stories that are going to get the most eyeballs and clicks?
Welcome to the tension of my job. And this is really fascinating for us because We clearly want to stand for our values, but we also need to be relevant and used. What we don't want to be is purely what I would call a market failure organisation, which is enjoy your main meal, but by the way, there's a bit of health food on the side. We like being the quality main meal, yeah? And that means that we have to balance the very things in your question, which is, firstly, I would say we never compromise our values. That first and foremost, I mean, now and again we'll make mistakes, but our overall thrust is we trust audiences to come after quality. And we know there are short-term things that probably could drive reach. Yeah, things that get clicks and all the general tensions. But we hold firm and say, we're going to do the right thing. But what that doesn't do is allow our newsroom, people that are working on our programs, to escape the pressure of trying to get used and the reach high. And that's the balance. That's the balance. I don't let people like myself or the people who work in the BBC off the hook in terms of trying to get an audience. Otherwise, you just end up being right, but very small.
Yeah, it sounds like almost being right somewhere in the middle, sometimes going to one side, sometimes on the other, is actually a pretty appealing place to be if you're...
If you get it, once you get it right, it's incredibly powerful. And whether that's in news or some of our biggest hits, like our natural history program with David Attenborough that many people listening will know, they're huge titles. In the UK, our high-quality drama is getting very big numbers at the moment. We're doing well. 90% of people in the UK use us every week. Every week, yeah? So we are still pretty obsessed with that usage. But if you really push me, the key thing here, and this is what our model allows and our charter allows, is we need to stand for something. And our values of being trusted, of high quality, we hold firm on that. And actually, I believe in that. I'm doing this job because I care about that. And people come to the BBC, they don't earn as much, but what they do is they do good. And that is, I'm not embarrassed to say that. It's not a restriction. It's absolutely the point of difference.
Yeah, and you've talked about the fact that you've used that differentiator as a recruitment tool.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm an old-fashioned brand guy, so my DNA has come from Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo, and the one thing is you play to your advantages. I mean, the people listening on this podcast, it's not rocket science. So if the whole market is chasing a certain kind of clicks and rates and making a commercial model work, in the UK, we can say, okay, we'll do something different. And people value that, they care about it. Again, I think there's a real battle on our hands to make sure the formats are fresh. The presenters we've got are exciting. Bringing the truth and bringing in what we call impartial lens on things does not mean it's unexciting, lacking in personality, is a thrilling story to tell, uncovering truth. Yeah, you've got to get excited about this. So it's not the dull option. That's the worry, which is the whole market's roaring and the public service broadcasters are bringing kind of the dull bit. That's not how I see it at all.
I love your excitement around this. Look, one of the groups who it seems are so important to realizing that vision are more kind of technologists, right? Not thinking about conventional journalists and others. You recently talked about an internet-only BBC. Can you talk about that vision?
Yeah, I think a lot of people in legacy businesses, they cling on to things for too long. This is an obvious statement, but if you get caught behind the market, it's quite scary. And I think that some of the things we've been talking about, truth, fact-based journalism, quality programming, really high-quality storytelling, drama, these things are too good to be consigned to legacy businesses on broadcast. And what I feel sometimes is those older businesses aren't really pushing their organizations and saying, look, digital opens up possibilities. Let me give you a couple of examples. One is in journalistic terms. If you're in a digital environment, say you're watching what would be a linear news broadcast, but it's on a digital, it's served via digital rather than broadcast. If I'm interested in a story, I can click on it, I can get more data, I can call up facts, I can check things. In other words, use digital not as a kind of daunting challenge. Use it to bring your story alive. If you're watching a sports event, a soccer event, or as we would say, a football event, my view is it's better on digital I can rewind to watch the goals, I can get more data, and I think I'm challenging our organisation to really embrace and get excited by the editorial potential of digital, rather than say, oh, we're a broadcast business, let's defend that to the death.
Well, I also feel like there's a generation of people that are used to watching every type of content in that way anyway.
Of course. I mean, we see the data is overwhelming. You know, many of the people listening to this will be never go near a broadcast signal. You know, and they're just everything is IPTV, internet radio. That's how it's working. I want us to be advantaged in that, and we need to have the very best product developers, technology department. I mean, this is a really demanding set of skills for an organisation that's 100 years old and now needs to reform itself in this way.
It's an exciting time for sure. One of the top findings from our just released Trust Barometer is that people feel societal divisions in their countries have become entrenched, leading to polarization. Respondents in the UK say they are polarized and on the brink of severe polarization. Talk about your vision for the BBC. How do you operate in this increasingly polarized environment?
We're certainly demanding, and I think business leaders listening to this will... everyone senses this. Everyone senses that people are getting more entrenched. There are certain areas of the social media universe where shouting prevails, and our research echoes your research, which is people are actually, in a disturbing way, sometimes a bit more worried about airing their opinions. And I think we've got big generational choices for people like myself as leaders to say, are we going to play a role in trying to break this down and really get to a point where my belief is people deep down really want to have functioning debate. They want to have high quality argument. They don't want to be fearful of what they can say. The BBC, in simple terms, needs to be the town square, needs to operate where we are not pushing down, and the lack of commercial imperative in the UK really allows the whole firm, and it's been a number one priority for me, which is just be impartial, go after the fact, but also be comfortable being uncomfortable. Be happy getting other views, really bring in different views, and also rewire the organisation so you're comfortable internally having those debates.
Yeah, that's really interesting, starting with the internal. Our research has shown that people see the workplace as an island of civility, where they're able to have tough conversations with coworkers that they wouldn't even necessarily have with a neighbor. So it's interesting that it starts internally. So actually, I'm curious what you've done in terms of creating this town square. Maybe let's start internally, and then maybe let's talk a little bit about some of the content that you're doing externally as well.
What we've tried to do in the BBC is a few things. We've gone back to our basic values and said we value debate. So after a news broadcast, when this gets very real, so after you and I had put together a news programme, when we come together at the end of it, how open are we into, did we cover all the issues? Have we missed anything? The other thing is the organisation itself needs to be pushed out of London. Okay, in US terms, that would mean out the coast. Yeah, I mean, you do not get a fair picture of America by sitting in Manhattan or LA, and that's no criticism of those two. It's simply you need people from a broad base. So we're recruiting from a broader base. I've even set what's called a socio-economic diversity target, so people with different backgrounds come in, and over half our staff now work outside London.
That's incredible. Part of the reason for the polarization is you talked about the shouting on both sides, but also, let's be real, there are more societal leaders who are out there telling flat-out lies. How do you cover people information that's just not true?
We probably want to do it in two chunks, actually. The first is this whole area of just misinformation, things that are not true being put out there. The second is then, how do you reflect a diversity of opinion and facilitate debate? If we take the misinformation, for the first time in its history, we've got actually a unit specially kind of dedicated to that in the BBC. They do nothing else. Yeah, they look at where is disinformation happening, where is fake news happening. They unpick it, they challenge it. If you go to any team, I would take something like the Persian service that's reporting on Iran. Enormous amount of work on verification, We have fixed editorial guidelines that we follow to make sure video is true. We're also looking at, and we face this as the BBC, where different actors are putting up coverage and putting our logo on it. So we have to be incredibly active in managing all of that and verifying everything we put out there.
So let's pause on that. How do you combat it when you see it?
Well, we can take. We actually have a trusted news initiative with a whole load of players, and we can actually take stuff down and react to that once we've found it. The issue is actually the pause when it's up there. I think that we are beginning to be more transparent in a good way in showing our working. So, if we get a piece of video, we will verify it again, make sure. We're beginning to explain to the public what that looks like. I saw some really interesting research that the majority of 16 to 34-year-olds don't believe anyone can be impartial. They just don't. They believe everyone is kind of spinning. So we're now having to be much more overt and say, look, our objective is really to get to the facts. And let me explain a process. It's not just me doing my best intent. We have strong editorial guidelines. This is our verification systems. This isn't an accident that we are delivering fact-based journalism.
Yeah.
It's a process.
And I think this is very much about being transparent about your own editorial guidelines and making sure that people are aware of your guidelines.
Well, our latest trail that basically is talking about BBC News and what it does, actually flips up the editorial guidelines and said, here they are, have a look at them. This is what we do. In Ukraine, where we need to witness something, but then we need to verify it. I think this has broader implications in the media. For your listening in any business, and I think this can be uncomfortable territory for businesses that present a front over many decades. I think you have to think, okay, what would happen if we were radically transparent? If people could unpick our processes, they could visit our factory. My factory is the editorial floor, yeah? Or the program makers in natural history. I'll give you an example. We now, when we make a natural history program featuring, say, a lion, a pride of lions, or in the Antarctic, there was a kind of debate about how those shots were made. Did they do some in the zoo? And so the natural history programming went through a bit of a seminal moment a few years ago. And what it said, no, we're going to show exactly what happened. So now you get a 50-minute program. If it's an hour, you get 10 minutes on the making of. It's one of the most popular sections of our programming. And it literally just shows you how the program was made, if we needed to do something in more kind of manufactured conditions, which you don't often, but you may say, look, this plant, we showed it, we grew it in here. We showed the whole process all the way through. Very popular, and trust is built.
It sounds like a great way to fight misinformation. I'm also curious about the kind of more nuanced area here of when there are people out there who are being somewhat deceptive and they might have a constituency behind them. When I think of BBC journalism, part of what makes it so powerful to me is this idea that you're a witness to the news.
Right.
I love watching a BBC broadcast because you almost feel like you're just inside of it, and the journalistic hand almost feels invisible. But if you are presenting a kind of 360 view of the news, what are you doing with authoritarian leaders, people who are doing things that might not be pure falsehoods, but quite misleading in certain ways? Do you feel like you always need to present experts on all sides of an issue? Has this evolved?
Right, so now we're in the, I mentioned, disinformation, misinformation. We're now into, okay, once you're through that, how on earth do you now encapsulate what is a complex world in which people are spinning, various people have their agendas, they're using direct to their base communication? I think the first thing is not that complicated, actually. You get very smart people to analyse, talk and reflect. So in some ways you described it and said, okay, we've got an authoritarian leader here who's trying. If you look at our bureau chiefs, the people around the world, I mean, we've got people in Russia, we've got people in China. They are fearlessly going out there and just saying, look, this is how I see it. And this is a blend of witness stuff, talk to people, understand different perspectives. I would say on the what we call the both-sidism, it's not as pure now as just here's someone from this side and this side. In climate change, we're not just putting a climate change denier and then a climate change activist. it is indisputable that man-made events have led to climatic warming. You therefore use scientific fact to frame the debate, then you have a debate within that framework.
So do you allow the climate deniers a voice, but then refute that voice with facts? Do you keep them out of stories?
I think my personal view is you probably, if they reach a point of scale, a conspiracy theory, you're talking to someone. Yeah, so the idea of just shut, but I think you're absolutely putting them in the context of this is clearly not borne out by the facts. The other thing is a word I use a lot, which is proportionality. This isn't like, let's give 50% of the time to the climate deniers and 50% to it. That's ludicrous, yeah? So proportionality, if 99.9 recurring of the scientific experts are in a place, you want to make sure your reporting reflects that. Now, if something's caught the public imagination, you may want to report on that, but you're absolutely working hard on the basis of fact to reflect proportionately the debate.
And as you've moved in this direction, have you gotten much backlash, particularly around perhaps some fringe groups?
If you're in my business, you're getting feedback every day. It's noisy out there. I think what's interesting is everyone wants to ascribe an agenda. So if you're asking that question, you must be from this side of politics, or we've looked at a certain person and their political background before they joined the BBC was this. They've clearly got an agenda. So I think people find it quite convenient now to parcel you and say, right, you are, Edelman is this type of organisation. And I think you have to work very hard to say, actually, no, here's our values, here's our intent, and just deliver against that. But your enemies and the people who want to unpick that are always looking for examples to fit their theory. I mean, that's just daily life.
Yeah, it really is. I love this phrase, it's noisy out there, and I'd love to apply it to leaders. I think of corporate leaders that we work with, and they're not quite used to some of the noise that's coming at them over the last several years, whether it be from employees or consumers or activists. Thinking of yourself more as a leader, giving advice to other leaders. I mean, BBC leading this organization, the volume for you must be remarkably high. Just as a person, how do you deal with that, and how do you equip your teams also to deal with it?
It's a great question, and certainly having taken a job that's firmly in the public eye and very publicly accountable, you're really getting it in the neck a lot. I think the first thing is you've got to engage. I think you've got to. I think you've got to be out there talking to people, making your case. You have to get over your fears of that, and you have to be confident that the reality is good. There's no good. I'm not a big fan of saying, okay, here's what we do. Now how do we present it? I kind of think, here's what we do. Let's present it. Let's spin it in a way that kind of saves our reputation. I think that thinking is very dangerous, largely, is a route to disaster. I think by and large, I'm going to be provocative, spend a lot of time on the comms. I spend time on making sure we're in a good place, and then the comms comes out of that. If you know what you think, you're happy with where you're at, the comms become fairly straightforward. Yeah. The second skill, I think, is proportionality. I'll use that word again. So, in my life, I know what a real crisis is. Yeah, a real crisis may be something with the family, with this. Now, the only reason I bring up heavy topics is you need to be able to look at that, because I think sometimes you can think that's a disaster. Actually, it's not. You just got to keep calm in these things and see the big picture.
That's really great advice. In terms of engagement, I'm curious where, though, you draw the line, right? So if you think of like fringe groups who are spouting misinformation, do you engage with them? Do you not engage with them? I just want to pick up on...
That's a really good question. I think there is a line, bluntly, which is I think you want to talk to legitimate groups, people who are interested in dialogue. There's not many that I look at and go, they're so far out there and they're just shouting and they're not listening. I would push people probably to meet a little bit more than they think they should. Than they think they should meet. Do you see what I mean? So no, anything's too dangerous. I don't talk to that person. I think you just have to be careful out there, and you always have to be in a position where you're talking to people sensibly. You're not. you're not exposing yourself in that. But my personal view is you broadly should be engaging with groups. There is a line. I agree with you. I think there are points where you go, this is just, there's no win for us here, and there's no rational dialogue, and there's no interest in moving the process forward. It's not many cases, but there are some where, just being honest, I just think not worth the return.
Yeah, I agree with that. Talk about engagement with your most important group, which is your own employees. How do you engage with them? How do you make sure that you're very aware of what's on their minds, what they're concerned about?
Yeah, I think that this is absolutely essential for any CEO or leader of any division or whatever you've got in front of you, is the ability to really listen and understand in a world in which I think there's just a lot of pressure, this polarization we've talked about. The world feels a bit more strained than it did a few years ago. I think, and of course COVID. So we add all that up. I think people need support. That's the first thing. I think they need clear. These are, again, it's not rocket science. Clear direction. What is the organisation there to do? And the final thing is, and this is ongoing work, is have you got a truly inclusive environment? Does everyone feel comfortable about speaking up? I think, personally in the BBC, we've got so much to do in the outside world that all that internal energy, if you waste it on politics, hierarchy, if you're stressed about your boss, I just can't stand it. We've got enough to do in the outside world. So in some ways, look after each other, live the values, and if you don't, that's an issue.
That's great advice. So this is your first time in person at Davos. You've done a lot of virtual World Economic Forum activities over the last few years. How's the experience been so far? Any surprises for you?
Not massive surprises. I mean, it's an incredible thing to see in all its glory, which is, here we are in a Swiss town with all these players everywhere talking. I mean, I think for people like myself, it's just very time efficient, bluntly, because you're meeting a lot of people in a pretty short span. I think you do get a sense, and I think it's important for any executive to just step back from the day job. It's a cliche, but it's true, isn't it? Like, just step back. What are the big things? You get a sense of what's in the air. I'm not talking about the private jets. I'm talking about the moods in the air. What are the trends? And I think that's been helpful, actually, just listening to some of the tech giants, in my case, a couple of the world leaders, just saying, okay, this is what's on our mind. And you don't quite know how much is useful until you take it home and it begins to shape your thinking.
Yeah, and on that way home, what do you hope to have accomplished during this week?
Firstly, very specifically, I've talked to some people that it's very time efficient way here in this kind of crazy village to talk to people, and I've got a book full of, sorry to be so detailed, but here's the actions, this is what we do, and that's about partnership. So it's where in this world you need partners. Even the biggest companies are thinking, what's the right partners? What's the right strategic alliances? So I've had a couple of conversations where I'm thinking, okay, we can take that forward. So very practically, that's what I'll take forward. Second is, of course, I've got journalists covering this event, haven't I? So I'll be interested in the coverage, and I'll be taking that back in terms of how we covered it, how we covering world economics and these bigger subjects. Are we doing enough? So if you're in the editor-in-chief role, which I am, I'm restless on our coverage. So I'll take that back. And finally, things like this, I wouldn't recommend them every day, but sometimes just getting out of the office and just quietly spend. I mean, I've got an hour or two free this afternoon, believe it or not. And what I'm going to do is I can do some thinking, I can do some writing, I can have a little think about where I'm at. That is pretty precious.
That is special time to be able to have. Tim, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for being our guest. And
Real pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for listening to Trust Makers.
Thank you for tuning into the Trust Makers, an Edelman podcast in partnership with Advertising Week, where we speak with leaders and other trust builders across institutions. See you next time.